Grief doesn't arrive gently. It barges in, draped in shadows, and whispers truths you weren't ready to hear. I thought the hardest part was over after Mom's funeral, that final quiet goodbye, the flowers settling into the damp earth. But grief has a cruel sense of humor. It doesn't just take people, it reveals them. 3 days after we buried Mom, my sister Lydia appeared at Willow Creek Cabin smiling as though she had every right to be there, dragging her husband Jason behind her and a U-Haul brimming with boxes. She didn't knock. She didn't ask. She just said Mom wouldn't want the house to sit empty, right? I stood on the porch, the will folded carefully in my pocket, my name printed as the only heir. The cabin Mom built with her hands, every cedar beam, every nail holding decades of memory, was being overrun by greed wrapped in family ties. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just watched them carry in their things and quietly began planning a surprise they would wish they'd never crossed this doorstep. Mom used to say the woods could tell when you were lying. Maybe that was why she loved this place so much. Here, nothing fake lasted. The cabin sat on 3 acres of sloping pine forest, not far from the lake where she took us fishing. It wasn't grand, but it was honest cedar walls, a porch that groaned like an old friend, the smell of sap clinging to everything. Built by Mom and Dad before he passed, each corner held a memory, a story, a fragment of a life I wasn't ready to lose. When the lawyer read her will, my hands shook as he said my name. I would inherit Willow Creek, the cabin, and all its land. Lydia's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and calculating. Jason muttered something about fairness, but I didn't respond. Mom had made her choice, and it wasn't up for debate. That night, I drove up alone. The road curved through the forest like a question I couldn't answer. When I parked, the silence greeted me first, heavy but comforting. Inside, the air still smelled of lavender and wood smoke. Mom's knitting basket sat beside her chair, a half-finished scarf dangling from the needles. I sank into that chair and closed my eyes. It wasn't peace yet, but it was close. The next morning, I made coffee the way Mom did, strong, no sugar, and walked outside barefoot. Dew soaked my toes. The creek gurgled nearby, the world quiet except for the heartbeat of the forest. Maybe finally I could start to heal. Then my phone buzzed. Lydia. "Hey, Harp. Jason and I have been thinking we should take care of the cabin for a while. You're still grieving. It'll help you to have family around." My pulse thudded in my throat. Take care of it as if it were some stray dog, not my inheritance. That's not necessary. I typed back, "I'm already here." Her reply came fast. "Perfect. We'll be there Saturday then. Can't wait. No question mark. No hesitation. Just certainty." I set down my cold coffee and stared out at the forest that had been Mom's pride and joy. She trusted me to protect it. For now, I said nothing. Let them come. The woods remember what belongs to them and what doesn't. By Saturday, gray clouds hung low, rain-scented air pressing against the cabin. I hoped maybe the weather would keep them away. Maybe Lydia would think a long drive into the forest wasn't worth it. But at noon, the crunch of tires on gravel shattered the quiet. Their SUV rolled up like it owned the place. Jason honked twice before cutting the engine. Lydia stepped out wearing Mom's faded blue scarf. "Can you believe it's been so long?" she said, her voice slicing the still air. "The cabin looks smaller than I remember." Jason glanced around, whistled, and muttered about upgrades. Maybe a new deck, fresh paint. You'd be surprised what this property could sell for. "Sell?" I said flatly, my stomach twisting. "Not yet," I thought. "Not while I'm here?" They didn't hesitate. Lydia and Jason brushed past me, dragging boxes across the porch as if the cabin had always belonged to them. Lydia waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be so tense, Harper. We'll just stay a little while. Keep the place warm." Mom wouldn't like that. Her words were sugar-coated, but the intent was sharp, slicing through the quiet of the morning. I didn't answer. I just watched as they settled in, moving furniture, claiming spaces, turning my mother's home into a stage for their intrusion. By sunset, the living room had transformed into chaos. Blankets, luggage, half-unpacked boxes littered the floor. Jason had claimed Dad's old recliner, his boots propped on the coffee table. Lydia rearranged Mom's handmade rug, shoving aside decades of memory as though it were a nuisance. "Where do you want us to sleep?" she asked sweetly, almost mocking. "Guest room or maybe the master, since it's bigger," I didn't answer. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself coffee, and stood at the window watching the rain blur the edges of the forest. Their laughter filled the house loud and wrong, like nails scraping on cedar. Later that night, when they finally slept, I stepped onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving everything dripping in silver. The air was sharp, alive. Mom's wind chime jingled faintly under the eaves, a melody she had loved, soft yet warning. I listened to the snoring that sounded too close to home and made a promise. They wanted to take what wasn't theirs. Fine. By the time I was done, they'd never want to cross this threshold again. The next morning, Lydia woke me with the clang of pots and pans, claiming the kitchen like it had always been hers. "Harper, where's the cinnamon Jason likes French toast?" Mostly things that belonged to other people, I thought, pulling on a sweater. I walked in to see her rifling through Mom's spice cabinet, her jewelry box open like decoration. "You shouldn't touch that," I said quietly. She waved a hand. "Relax, Mom wouldn't care." But she was wrong. Mom cared about everything in this cabin. Every chipped mug, every scuffed floorboard told a story. Lydia saw possessions. I saw legacy. My eyes narrowed. "You're right," I said, forcing a tight smile. "Mom wouldn't want us to fight." Jason's phone buzzed and I caught a glimpse of the screen. "Any updates on listing?" My pulse jumped. Listing as in real estate. They weren't just squatting, they were planning to sell it. That afternoon, while they were out scouting buyers, I set to work. 2 motion-activated cameras, wine chimes made of tin industrial bear spray and powdered meat scent. The forest would watch. The driveway, the porch, the edge of the woods, I mapped it all. By sunset, the air smelled faintly of pine and something wild beneath it. I washed my hands, humming Mom's lullaby. Let them think I was quiet. Let them think I was weak. Night fell heavy and alive. Around midnight, a metallic clink echoed from the trees, followed by a low groan as wind slid through the pines. Jason muttered something in his sleep, but Lydia stirred too. "Harper, did you hear that?" she whispered. I yawned, pretending to wake. "Probably the wind. Go back to bed." Another clink closer this time, a scraping sound near the shed. I smiled in the darkness. The first camera had gone live. Jason grabbed a flashlight, shining it into the fog, eyes wide. The beam caught a pair of glowing eyes. He froze. "Holy." His voice cut short, replaced by a grunt from the unseen animal. Panic seized him and he bolted. Lydia clutched her robe, stammering about animal control. "Sure," I said, sipping tea. "Just moved into bear country without permission." By morning, silence had returned to the forest, but Jason refused to step outside, pacing like a caged animal. Alerts from the cameras showed him checking tracks, muttering to himself. When he passed a sensor, a pre-recorded growl roared through the woods. Jason screamed a flock of crows bursting from the trees. He slammed the door behind him, trembling. "Harper, there's something out there," Lydia paled. "We should leave." "No," he snapped. "I'm not letting her scare us off." Her eyes flicked to mine. I tilted my head. Doing what? Just securing my property. Nature has a way of dealing with intruders. That night, they didn't laugh. They didn't play music. They just sat in the dark, every creak and clink, making them flinch. For the first time since Mom's funeral, I slept soundly. By the 4th day, the tension inside the cabin felt like the static just before a storm. Jason hadn't stepped outside since the growl incident, and Lydia flinched at her own reflection in the windows. Every clink of the metal cans in the wind sent her recoiling. I moved through the cabin with careful calm, reading, cleaning. Humming softly, but beneath the surface, a quiet, deliberate anger had replaced the fear I'd carried since the funeral. This was no longer about grief. It was about reclaiming what was mine. That afternoon, Lydia cornered me in the kitchen, her voice tight, her eyes sharp. "This has gone far enough. Whatever's happening here, the noises, the lights, stop it." I stirred my tea, slowly, calm as glass. "I'm not doing anything I said evenly. Nature just has a way of dealing with intruders. Her brow furrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Jason burst in, then waving my tablet like a weapon. You think we're stupid I found your camera feeds? I froze for a heartbeat, realizing he'd gone through my things. Lydia's lips trembled. You've been filming us. I've been securing my property, I corrected gently. Mom left this house to me. Your guests, uninvited ones, don't get to decide otherwise. Jason scoffed, attempting bravado. Guests. We're family. You can't record us without permission. I don't need your permission, I said. Legally, I owned every wall, every inch of land. His sneer faltered when I mentioned the listing. You mean the draft property ad? I asked, nodding at the tablet. The color drained from both their faces as I scrolled through the images. Lydia opening Mom's jewelry box, Jason snapping photos of tools, Lydia whispering hurriedly on the phone. Once this listing went live, they wouldn't even know until the property had been sold, and it wasn't theirs to sell. Jason slammed the tablet onto the counter. You think you can blackmail us? No, I said, calm as ice. You set yourselves up. I just pressed record. I slid a flash drive across the counter alongside printed copies of Mom's will, the property deed, and an email from the attorney confirming the title transfer. The originals are in cloud storage. My lawyer already has access. If anything happens to me or this cabin, these go straight to the sheriff's department. Lydia's voice cracked. Harper, please don't ruin us. We were desperate. We just needed a fresh start. I met her gaze evenly. Then you should have asked, not taken. Jason's nostrils flared. You're insane. You've always been jealous of Lydia, her marriage, her success, everything. Jealous of someone who can't survive without stealing from the dead. I shot back. Mom wouldn't have wanted this. She left this house to me, and I won't let anyone betray that trust. Their resistance faltered. Lydia's tears began to spill over. We just wanted a fresh start to move somewhere new. Silence swallowed the room. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Jason muttered something under his breath, stormed out through the window, and slammed the door behind him. You can rot in this cabin alone, he spat. I whispered softly. At least I'll be surrounded by things that belong here. I walked through the rooms afterward, touching Mom's books, her knitting still draped over the chair photographs pinned to walls. Each item whispered memory and legacy, and I whispered back, It's over, Mom. I did it. But triumph was not what stirred in my chest. It was sorrow. Lydia's tears. Jason's anger, the threads of a family now broken. The forest was quiet again, but I almost heard Mom's voice in the wind. You did what you had to do. Harper. I closed the door, locked it, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt like mine. 3 days later, the sheriff called. His voice was calm but firm. Miss Hayes, we received a tip about possible property fraud involving your sister. Someone tried to list your cabin for sale under her name. I smiled faintly. I was wondering when that would catch up to them. You sound prepared, he said. Already have documentation, video dates, and a lawyer ready to act, I replied. The case was closed shortly after. No courtroom drama, no jail time, just a clean line, drawn a boundary respected. That night, a folded piece of paper appeared under the door. My name scrolled across it in Lydia's handwriting. You win, Harper. I hope you enjoy your precious cabin. You've turned into someone I don't even recognize. For a moment, I wanted to crumple it in anger, but the smudged ink told a story of rain or tears. I placed the letter on the mantel beside Mom's photograph. In the firelight, her smile looked different, proud, maybe relieved. The next morning, I walked down to the lake. Mist hovered over the water, pale and weightless, curling around the wooden dock like whispers of the past. I sat at the edge, coffee warming my hands, feeling the chill seep through my sweater. The lake reflected the pale gray sky, a mirror for the stillness that had settled over Willow Creek. This was the place Mom loved most, not just for its quiet beauty, but for how it forgave everything, storms, mistakes, even betrayal. I breathed in deeply, the scent of pine and damp earth grounding me. Walking back up to the cabin, I noticed the tin cans strung along the trees, rattling softly in the morning breeze. The sound no longer struck fear. It was rhythmic, gentle, almost like a lullaby. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was Mom. Either way, it reminded me that peace doesn't come from avoiding battles. It comes from facing them on your own terms. I stepped onto the porch, pulled Mom's cardigan around my shoulders, and let the quiet of the forest seep into me. The cabin looked different now, not merely as a house I had inherited, but as something I had earned through patience, cunning, and a respect for what truly belonged to me. I spent the days that followed tending to the small personal acts that made this place home. Loose porch steps were repaired, the wind chime Mom had made from seashells was rehung with care, and her tiny garden patch was restored. Each nail I hammered, each seed I planted, felt like a conversation with her, one word at a time. Sometimes I still heard echoes of Lydia's voice in my head, her laughter, her pleas, her anger, but the cabin no longer carried that weight. The house had returned to its true state, a space for quiet truth and remembrance. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the pines, a small envelope appeared in the mail slot. My name was written in Lydia's handwriting. I held it for a long moment, unsure if I wanted to open it. Finally, I unfolded the paper. Harper. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want to say I'm sorry to you, to Mom, to myself. I let anger and desperation guide me. Jason and I are separated now. If you ever decide to visit Mom's garden, I would like to come once. L. I stared at the words, the forest around me holding still as if listening. Slowly, I folded the letter and placed it beneath Mom's photograph above the fireplace. Maybe one day, I whispered, but not yet. Outside, the forest glowed gold with the last light of day, the tin cans rattling softly in harmony with the breeze. It was no longer a warning, it was gentle, rhythmic, like the world was breathing alongside me. I sat in Mom's old chair on the porch blanket over my knees, watching the trees sway against the fading sky. The cabin felt alive again, infused with the stories, memories, and love that Mom had built into every wall and beam. The forest had tested me, just as it had tested her, and like her, I had endured, bruised wiser, but still standing. The war was over, and for the first time since the funeral, the house felt like home in every sense of the word. Spring arrived quietly that year. Snow melted from the roof, the creek began to hum softly, and tiny wildflowers pushed through the frost-bitten ground. I took it as a sign the forest was healing. So was I. Mornings were spent on the porch with a cup of coffee, writing in the journal Mom had given me years ago, each page beginning with her favorite phrase, "Begin again." It was more than a mantra. It was a guide, a way to honor her memory while forging my own path forward. Sometimes the echoes of the past lingered, a laugh, a shout, a fleeting shadow, but the cabin no longer trembled under them. Every act of care I performed reminded me that this space, this sanctuary, belonged to those who respected it, to those who loved it, and that love was stronger than any greed or deception. Days stretched into weeks, each one unfolding like a soft, steady pulse of life, returning to Willow Creek. The cabin, once a battleground of stolen intentions and whispered threats, now breathed with the rhythm of quiet mornings and golden sunsets. I spent hours sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, watching sunlight scatter across the pine needles, listening to the faint gurgle of the creek below. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the trees, reminded me that I had claimed more than a house. I had reclaimed the memory of my mother, the sanctuary she had built with her hands, her heart, and her insistence on honesty. One afternoon, Lydia's letter still resting under Mom's photograph, I walked through the garden. Tiny shoots were pushing through the soil, stubborn and bright against the frost-kissed earth. I touched each one, thinking of Mom, thinking of the cabin, thinking of the quiet strength it took to stand firm in the face of greed. The forest no longer felt like a judge watching for lies. It was a companion, an old friend that had endured storms and heartbreak just as I had. Evenings became a time for reflection. I lit the fireplace, poured a small glass of tea, and sat on the old chair Mom had claimed as hers. The fire crackled shadows dancing across the walls, and I felt her presence in the warmth of the room, in the scent of pine and lavender, lingering from the past. I whispered softly, "I know, Mom. I know." It wasn't triumph. I felt it was understanding. Peace wasn't about winning or losing. It was about standing your ground, respecting what is sacred, and letting the world unfold on its own terms. I began documenting everything in the journal Mom had given me. Each entry was a conversation with her, a way to process the grief, the anger, the betrayal, and eventually the healing. Begin again, I wrote repeatedly. Not to erase what happened, but to honor it and transform it into something enduring. I repaired what was broken, nurtured what was fragile, and allowed myself to finally breathe in the safety of a home that was mine, both legally and spiritually. Months later, spring fully arrived. Wildflowers painted the edges of the forest, the creek whispered louder than ever, and the cabin no longer carried the heaviness of deceit. The world outside might still harbor greed and desperation, but inside I had created a space of clarity, love, and resilience. And in that, I found not only a home, but a deep, unshakable connection to the mother who had taught me how to endure storms without losing myself. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear the faint rattle of the tin cans, rhythmic and soft, and I would smile. Not a warning anymore, but a lullaby. The forest had witnessed the conflict, observed the choices, and now it acknowledged the peace that had been earned. I had protected Mom's legacy, respected her wisdom, and in doing so, learned the quiet power of patience, courage, and deliberate action. Life, I realize, doesn't give peace freely. It is earned through patience, through standing firm when wronged, and through honoring the things that truly matter. The cabin, the forest, the small sacred spaces Mom had built, they were all reminders that love and perseverance endure far longer than greed or fear. I closed the journal, the final words fading into the soft evening light. Standing on the porch, I watched the golden rays spill over the pines, wind teasing the tips of the trees. The cabin looked exactly as it should, lived in, loved, and protected. I breathed in the scent of pine, felt the warmth of the fading sun, and finally understood what Mom had always known. Peace comes, but only after you fight for it, only after you honor what belongs to you and defend it with heart and mind aligned. If you've ever struggled to protect what you love, to stand firm in the face of betrayal, remember this story. Life tests us, but the things worth keeping, love, legacy, and integrity, are always worth the fight. Thank you for joining me in this story. If it moved, you please like, share, and subscribe for more cinematic tales of courage, family, and resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how you protect your own sacred spaces.